What's up, bookworms? This is Megan coming at you with another Cantina conversation. Today's episode is actually a bonus episode rewind. It's actually an interview that I conducted back in April 2023, a couple of years ago, with none other than Rebecca Yarros. So this was before Fourth Wing came out. I was just talking with Rebecca to help her promote her book that was about to come out into the world before she or anybody else could have foreseen it becoming as huge as it is today. And for those of you who don't know, Cantina Book Club is a spinoff of the Nerd Cantina podcast. That was a podcast that I was doing with my cousins that they were hosting, and I was doing book reviews and interviews for them. After they discontinued their podcast, I went off on my own for Cantina Book Club. And I want to give also a shout out to the lovely podcasters at Book Podcast Connection as a community that we're a part of, and we're so supportive, bouncing ideas off each other. So definitely find them on Instagram and you'll get a list of other bookish podcasts that I definitely recommend you checking out. But they convinced me to go ahead and dig it into my files and repost the interview. So I'm also going to post the video on YouTube along with some other clips for you guys to enjoy and check out. And so I really loved going back into this file and reviewing this interview to not only see how much I've grown as a podcaster and an interviewer, but also to go back in time and to see how Rebecca has grown as a person, as an author, and as someone who has to do these interviews to promote her books. And what you guys will be happy to see that what you're hearing and seeing in this interview, she has not changed. It's who she is. There's a lot of good stuff here, which I think that you guys will enjoy. But just a heads up, it is only on Fourth Wing and it is from 2 years ago. So please be kind and keep that in mind. And without further ado, here is Rebecca Yarros. So today we've got Rebecca Yarros. We're talking about Fourth Wing. It's coming out on May 2nd. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today at Fourth Wing. It was what a ride, pun intended. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed just everything. We'll definitely get into it, but I just really enjoyed everything that you had to offer in Violet's story. Thanks for sitting down to chat today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And it's quiet in my house. You will never get it this quiet again. There's no one here.
Okay, I was going to say, don't jinx it. Do you have any pets running around?
I do. And as soon as I said that, I was like, watch my cat come in and be a jerk face right now, or my dog start running laps upstairs.
Yeah. That's my cue.
I know.
Absolutely. So before we get started, can you give like a little summary of Fourth Wing so that readers and listeners can follow along with the conversation?
Absolutely. And I suck at this. Let's just be clear with that. So Fourth Wing is about a 20-year-old woman. It's high fantasy. It's about a 20-year-old woman who's been taught her entire life she's going to enter the scribe quadrant of this war college where there are 4 different majors. She was trained as a scribe and raised as a scribe. Her father was a scribe. And she has a chronic illness where her body is frail and breaks easily and her joints give out. She is basically the fantasy edition of Ehlers-Danlos. And so her mother says, no, you will not be a scribe, because she's commanding general. Sorengales are all dragon riders. And she throws her into the dragon riders quadrant, where a third of that class isn't going to survive to see graduation. And their motto is graduate or die. So if you don't get chosen by a dragon, there's less dragons than there are cadets willing to bond. So the cadets are also out to not necessarily kill each other, that they do. They don't want any weakness within the wing. So they're after the weaker cadets to increase their life threshing, which is when the dragons bond. And she is tossed in there as the daughter of the commanding general. There was a rebellion 6 years ago, and she's in there with the kids. Her mother hunted down for execution. So she has a target on her back, and the biggest target, her own wing leader, whose name is Zayden Ryerson, and his father was the leader of the rebellion. So you've got some automatic tension there, and shenanigans ensue.
Yeah. Yeah, that's putting it lightly, definitely. So before we dive deeper into all that, can you go into your background? And because you got tons of published books under your belt, like we were saying earlier, you've got about 10 years of published works anyway. Go into your background a little bit and maybe what led you to bring Violet's story to life.
Sure. Fantasy is my first love. It always has been. I was raised on Mercedes Lackey and Anne McCaffrey and Larry Dixon and all of those fantasy writers. And so my first book was actually fantasy, and it died on submission, which is like where you have an agent and they submit and the publishers are like, we're not going to buy it, but we're not going to reject you. We're going to like let you hang out and see what everyone else is going to do. And it died that death. And while that happened, I wrote my first romance novel, which is called Full Measures. And while my husband was getting ready for I have to like count them. I think that was his 4th deployment to a combat zone. He's going to Afghanistan. And it got picked up and published. And suddenly I was on a romance track. I love romance. We're just going to go ahead and say that. Like I'm a huge romance genre fan. And so I spent the next 10 years writing romance. And then a girlfriend of mine called me up and said, hey, your publisher is going to do this line of new adult fantasy. And that's what I've been writing, was new adult. And what do you think about them? And so I talked to her about it, and she did sign with them. And then I thought, yeah, that would be fun. And so I called my agent and said, I want to go do this. And my publisher was like, wait, you what? Because all they've known me is for romance. I'm like, yeah, I want to do this. And so I hopped on a call with Liz Peltier, who's the head of Red Tower and Entangled. And she's been my editor in the past. And I gave her like 5 different pitches. And she was like, the dragons. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay. Because, in publishing, you had to be really flexible. You got to have more than one story ready to pitch. And so I was like, dragons. All right, okay. And we finagled the pitch so that it fit into that high concept. And she said, lean into your military background. And I had them in an Army unit. She said, let's do it at a war college. I said, yeah, totally cool. Let's, instead of an Army unit, yeah, war colleges be awesome. And I said, I really feel strongly that I would like this girl to have Ehlers-Danlos. And my publisher was like, okay, because we're tiptoeing into areas where own voices are really important. And she didn't know I have it. So I have Ehlers-Danlos. My sons all have Ehlers-Danlos.
So can you elaborate on what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a connective tissue disorder. It's a group of 13 different connective tissue disorders. Basically, our bodies, we don't make collagen correctly. We have a default in our collagen. Our joints pop out. We subluxate our joints. We're hypermobile. So we can do things like touch our thumbs to our wrists. My son can stick his tongue up into his nose. It's the grossest thing ever. And he will show you without you asking. Things like their bones break easily because collagen is in every part of our bodies. Like one of my kids was walking up the stairs, tripped, his ankle stayed behind. One of my kids has a titanium bar in his chest to move his sternum because it was compressing his heart. His sternum grew inward. All of my kids have scoliosis. Like we just, we're a fun bag of party tricks.
So it's like highly genetic and like, yeah. Oh, that's unfortunate. Yeah.
It's a 50% chance. You have 50% chance of passing it on.
Okay.
And I gave it to all 4 of my biological children.
Oh.
So my bad. But they've let it stop them from certain things. Like we're not supposed to do things like play soccer, or we're really concussion prone, things like that. So they all chose to keep playing hockey because it's all.
I was gonna say, so naturally just going for like the highest contact almost besides football. I don't know.
It is, but the highest concussion rates are in soccer. And
okay.
So
that makes sense. There's no helmets, right? So
there's no helmets. And one of our kids was playing goalie and dislocated his thumb, caught a ball, dislocated his thumb, caught a ball, broke his wrist, like it was that kind of stuff. So in hockey, they're super padded. We've seen less injuries. Like one of my kids broke an arm just because on ice contact, but we've seen less injuries in hockey than other sports. But we had just gotten the diagnosis. I was 38 when we got the diagnosis, and I just knew something was off. We'd gotten certain scans back on our kids, and I'm like, we are either the unluckiest family to have walked the earth, or something is wrong. And we went through the diagnosis. It takes a really long time to get these diagnoses. And they came back and said, yeah, it's Ehlers-Danlos. And I had picked that out and called one of my friends who's a cardiologist and was like, I think we have Ehlers-Danlos. And he's like, all right, what's your reasoning? And I'm like this. And he's like, that's exactly what you have. And our lives were a little upended. I had POTS flares at the same time, like where we stand up and our heart rate just climbs and climbs. It doesn't go down and we pass out. Super fun at parties, like super fun. But it had debilitated me during the worst POTS flare for about a year, where I couldn't drive and I could barely get off the couch. And I didn't traditionally publish for a year because I couldn't sit down. I didn't have the right medications or the right accommodations. And so writing Violet, it was really important to me because I needed to see a heroine like me, like in fantasy, because we get all these badass heroines and I'm all for badass heroines. But I wanted to see someone who could be badass according to her own measurements.
Right.
And
yeah.
someone who had used their wits.
Yeah, she definitely does. I love that about her because she has to be resourceful and use the advantage that she does have, which is like the life of just studying history of that world. And also, she's also very just, she has a very strong will because she doesn't want any, for lack of better words, like handicaps, like any like abled modifications. She refuses any of that sort of treatment because it's just always only going to make her stand out more, and she does not want to stand out in that negative light any more than she already is. I love that. It just adds that layer and it adds that extra risk. And she just like sticks out. She accepts her fate. Unfortunately, everyone's trying to like help her get out of her position, get out of her situation. There's no use. I just have to do my best and I have to use what I have. And and by the way, there's this guy's gonna want to kill me. Like he hates me.
Right.
Like,
It is. And it's a really fine line between giving her the accommodations she needs to be successful that would be like acceptable in that society, and understanding what makes her a bigger target or what makes her weak, because this is not a friendly society. This is a society where weakness is absolutely hunted down. And it made me very nervous, honestly, to write a character with chronic illness, even though I have it, just because it is such an unfriendly society for it. Do you know what I mean? It's not in our society where these accommodations should be given and should be absolutely expected.
no, it's just, yeah, they just see it as, okay, you're a waste of space. We've got more bigger fish to fry. You're just like, you're a distraction. You're going to waste our time. You don't belong here. Almost as they don't see the person. They don't like see the humanity. They just see it as a place, a pawn in the lineup, and just picking it off. Okay. You're the weakest link.
Yep. And that a lot with Imogen's character, who is a second year. She's the one who breaks her arm to begin with. She doesn't really get to know them until after threshing. She's like, you aren't people until after threshing, because they die so repeatedly in that first year, whether it's on this obstacle course called the Gauntlet, or during presentation when they have to walk past all the dragons, or threshing. They all become so desensitized to death that they're like, I don't want to know you until I have a purpose to.
Yeah. Yeah. Until I'm sure that you're going to be around. Until there's no, they don't want to put the effort in because they don't even, what's the point?
It hurts to watch people die. And that's, as I'm writing the second book, it's fun because she's in the second book. So it's fun to see the differences between where you are your first year and just trying to survive and what it looks like in the next.
Yeah, definitely. So hopping on your comment earlier about switching back, like fantasy, you start off fantasy, love romance, went to romance, back to fantasies. Like, I want to explore that. Like what specifically draws you to both genres? What made you decide to switch gears, or what brought you back to fantasy for this latest piece?
Fantasy scared the crap out of me. It scares the crap out of me. And we were just talking about this when I wrote my first book. I think I wrote my first book a page a night. I'm going to tell that story a lot because I was raising kids during deployments. My husband was gone and I was running a business. So I'd write a page a night. And at the end of this, you have this book, right? And it becomes your book baby. And you're so certain that everyone's going to think your book baby is the prettiest book baby. That when you get your first rejection from an agent, like I can tell you exactly where I was when that first rejection came in, and I was dumbfounded. I was like, wait, it's not for you. It's my book baby. Beautiful. You know what I mean? And I realized now I know exactly what's wrong with it. I'm like, oh, that's trite. Oh, did you really? Oh, that's what you went with? So I've always read fantasy, but I've always loved romance. To me, any book I read, and this doesn't go for every reader, of course, it's all personal preference. I have to have a strong romance plot, subplot at least, plot preferable. I've been reading Jude Deveraux since I was like 11 in the backseat of the car. And my parents just never censored what I read. Go mom and dad. No, really, I love it. Like I told them that the other day. I was like, because you never censored me, everything. So I love romance. And I've been married to my husband for, I don't know, over 20 years, like a really long time. We've been together since we were 19. And so when I read romance or write romance, I get to fall in love all over again. And I'm only going to ever love this one man. Like I really like him. He's hot. We have a lot of kids together. He is my dream man. So romance allows me to experience those emotions and fall in love over and over again.
Yeah.
And fantasy allows me to add dragons. Because in contemporary romance, you get stuck in this plot where it's boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. So I really wanted those external forces back in there to be able to, and I love internal conflict. I always make sure my characters have internal conflict. The fantasy, there's dragons, there's people who write fae, people who write wizards, people who write or walk into paranormal. You can add in that beautiful, wonderful external conflict. And I knew that I always wanted to get back to fantasy, but it just scared the crap out of me. You get pulled into this thing as an author with your branding. What's your brand? You get told as soon as someone hears your name, if you come on, not everyone knows anyone's name, but if someone knows your name, they should know what to expect when they open a book.
Sure, yeah.
And I was terrified. And I knew that if I wanted to publish a fantasy, I was going to have to write a full fantasy. It might not get picked up. It might not get supported. It might become what I call a desk drawer book, which is a book I wrote and now lives in the desk drawer, waiting for a revision time or waiting for the market to shift. And this opportunity, because I've worked so close with Liz before Peltier, I knew that this is it. And then if I wanted to write a fantasy, this was it. And so I brought her the pitch, and again, we just tweaked it, and I wrote her the synopsis and the first 10 pages. And I thought it would be like the 6th book in the line. It would be like right in the middle where they'd already warmed up to some people and there wouldn't be a lot of pressure. And then I was in the hospital with my kid who's getting the titanium bar in his chest. And she's, no, we want you to launch the line. I need the rest of the pages. And I'm like, I'm in the hospital.
Okay.
And she's like, when can you write it? And I'm like, I have to get home from the hospital. And then, and then I got home and I wrote the first 50 pages, and it just, it took on a life of its own.
That's amazing.
It just went. So it's coming home, because legit fantasy is where I read when I have time. That's I read.
And it's better when you were able, because I feel like the romance story in there just did happen, even though it's not a spoiler to say it's enemies to lovers.
No.
Yeah, even though that is an enemies to lovers trope, it felt like natural. It happened like organically, where that attraction was there and the proximity was there, like the stakes were there, like whatever is going on, the bigger picture is bigger than what's going on between them, but you set it up where they've been connected since before they were born, essentially, almost, right? They have history before they even knew they had history, and it just makes it even like that much more like perfect. And just even just with some of the once it builds up, and then once it gets going, it gets going, it really gets going. And it's funny that you said you love romance, because I think it's definitely a guilty pleasure of mine. And I think almost any reader is lying if they say that they're not a fan of that. And not even if it's just not like steamy details, like everyone loves the will they won't they, or that build up, that slow burn, all that, like just whether it's a slow burn or not, I always find myself like, come on, get to it, go ahead and kiss her, go ahead and what's going to happen, let's just do it already. And then it is a guilty pleasure for sure. It's okay, here we go, like, all right. It gets me excited. And yeah, it's like adding. And so especially when it's also a distraction to them, and it makes them so much more like relatable as people, as characters, that I'm training. If I don't train, then my chances of dying are gonna increase. But oh, look at those muscles over there. Like it just adds to that, the realistic scenarios and things like that.
They're 20. Like, they're essentially in college now. They're in a college where they're in the elite section of the college, because dragon riders are elite and yada yada. But like, when push comes to shove, like, I love new adult because they're 20 years old and hormones are raging, and you don't get to make as foolish a mistakes that you can in YA and get away with it. Think about when you're 20, like, you make giant mistakes, you make giant decisions that have huge lasting consequences. And I think that one of my favorite parts is when they're on the mat, and I think 2 of the guys are off sparring, and her friend's like, are we ogling? And they're like, oh yeah, we're objective. Are we objective? Oh, we are. Yes, we are. And everyone has turned to stare. And I think it's just a natural human reaction. I think the tension's where it's at for me. It's always that. It's the will they, won't they? And it's the when, like, when are you going to break? Because to me, the best moment is that final moment when they're like, F it, and we go. But I think you have to build to me, the payoff is building that tension so that when it breaks, it is a relief to the reader. And it's like all horses go, we are like all systems, let's rock. Because if you bring it on too early, to me, I feel like they haven't earned it. Makes sense. Like I want them to earn it. And I'm not a big like insta love. I'm not saying it's not valid and people can't love it. You love what you love. But me, there's got to be something, there, something built so that when you get to that payoff, it's exactly that's payoff.
Yeah, and there is like an insta love. It does sometimes it works, but yeah, it's just it's a little. It's almost the author has to work a little bit harder to make it believable to make it work. Because I've never believed in love at first sight, at least not until like I gave birth to my children, and I'm like, okay, no, that's that's the closest thing. Because otherwise, I'm just no, like I don't. Yeah, I lust at first sight, maybe like
Yeah.
you see someone and you're
Yep.
like, "Oh, shit, that holy shit." But other than that, it's so yeah, to read it in literature or no matter what the genre, it's okay, we'll go with it. But yeah, with like I agree with you where you have to that build up as frustrating as it could be because you're just like waiting for you're like, come on. But I definitely agree, like they has to be believable, they have to earn it, they have to like not it can't just be so convenient that it's that easy.
And I think especially like enemies to lovers I would have said it was my weakest trope until I started writing this one, because I think in contemporary settings, it's mostly like grumpy to lovers. Do you know what I mean? Like there's not like a lot of reasons to be actual enemies. And when you have a fantasy world, it's, oh no, dude, like her mom killed your dad and your dad killed her brother. And things are very bad. So I had a ton of fun with it. Let's put it that
Yeah.
way. I had a ton of fun with it.
Yeah, and also like adding the love triangle almost like where her childhood best friend, like she's, got little butterflies in her stomach for him, like difference in between how they approach that with her. Because
Mm-hmm.
Dane is, no, I'm just trying to protect you. I can get you out of this or what. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. And Zayden's, no, okay, no. See, this was your first mistake. This is what you need to do here. No, what are you going to do next time? Like that's where I see you coming. Like I fooled you. That he's like helping her or he's like he's encouraging her. And that's like ultimately where that's what she wants. She finds herself wanting not only to like prove it to herself, but prove it to her mom, prove it to
Mm-hmm.
everyone who's like doubting her, everyone who's out to kill her. She's like there's like a bunch of stakes, and she finds that her motivations like align with the person who maybe wants to see her fail the most, almost like at least
Right.
on the surface, but like deep down readers learn that there's a reason why he's trying to teach her and he's trying to help her improve.
And I think I do love Dane. It's so funny to me because when you go through edits and the process of things that happen with characters, Dane to me is the love you think you want at that age and what you think you've needed. And Dane is so used to having to protect her because they've grown up together and he's a year ahead of her in the quadrant. So they've been apart for a year. So he's become desensitized to a lot of things because of being in the quadrant for a year. And she's had a year to fantasize what she thinks that relationship will still be. And I think once you get there and you realize, oh, I'm not this person anymore. You've evolved into this person. I don't necessarily need you to protect me anymore. And her realizing you're not necessarily what I want. Instead of who am I going to choose? There's very much like the love we think we need at that age. And then as you grow, the love you realize that it was what you want and what is supportive and what the person who's the most supportive is also the person who's don't die, whatever. So I do love Dane. Dane's just so rigid and Dane doesn't have it within him to break rules. And he is so by the book and she's learning where this flexible area is, which is where Zayden just lives. The man ain't like it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what she needs. She needs to be flexible because business is not as usual for her, just from like how she was born, the condition that she's living with. If she played by the book and didn't think outside of the box, like she would be done. That's what she needs to do. And Dane was trying to like tunnel vision, black and white. No. And I have no chance if I think that way.
Dane is so focused that she cannot survive the quadrant that he's unwilling to see ways that she could, ways for her to succeed in the quadrant. His priority is get her out. And she's like, there's no way out. My mother's gonna throw me back in here. There is no way out. And I think that's one thing is as she accepts the fact, no, I'm a writer. Like I thought just my brother and my sister were writers, my mother, but I am too. And it's finding that strength to be who you are instead of what everyone has cast you as, especially when you do have chronic illness and they look at you as you're the weaker one, or you're the one who has to be babied or things like that. And it's her being like, no, I can do this. And unfortunately, Dane doesn't see past that.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause he's, you could understand where he's coming from too, just cause he's known her since they were like elementary age, and he feels, and he feels like he knows what's best for her. And also cause he's got a year ahead of her, so he knows how cutthroat and how dangerous it is. And so that's why he's, oh, absolutely not. And he just is I understand he's trying to protect her, but at the end of the day, it's listen to her, dude. Listen to her. And she's been living in her body her whole life. And although I don't know if Violet's the type of person to accept when she's met her limit. It seems like she's just always trying to raise that bar.
She's trying to raise the bar, and there's a struggle with her about where the limit is. And I think if it wasn't set at a school where they'll kill you when you reach the limit, there's plenty of times where she'd be like, you know what, I can't do this today. And I struggled with that, wanting to make sure that I wasn't like stumbling into like ableist territory where it's like, oh no, she has to get up and go. Like she can't have this mercy. She absolutely is merciful with herself in certain regards. And when she allows herself to be mended, or when she takes a day, but in that environment where they're going to kill the weakest link, she feels like she has to find a way. She has to keep pushing. And I love that she uses her brain mostly to make up that difference. And she's got to train. You have to learn how to spar. You have to learn how to do all these things. But when push comes to shove and she can't do things, even when she fights the accommodation, she has to realize this is what I need to make this happen. And this is what we'll do. So I like that she has that given her. But yeah, recognizing her limits is not something she's good at.
Yeah, and understandably, just because she just from the circumstances, like if I think maybe also partially because she's afraid that if she does identify a limit for herself, she's afraid that she's holding herself back, and that's gonna hurt her in the long run. Like
and she's scared the second she says I can't do this, it's a target on her back. So the second she has to go back and be mended, and they know they've hurt her, they know how to hurt her again.
Yeah.
The gauntlet is one scene where she's actually like where she's too small to accomplish something. I cannot do this. And as Dane's, let's go, let's get out. Zayden's, figure it out.
Yeah.
The right way isn't the only, and that's one of his things, is like the right way isn't the only way. And so I like that she has the ability to look and see, I can do this, but she just keeps raising that bar for herself until at some point, it's a series. So at some point you have to learn what that limit is.
I know, I'm like so excited about the series, and now I'm like, of course, we'll get into that, but that once you get to the end, I'm just like, oh, of course she did that to us.
And I think everyone knows out there that it's got a cliffhanger, because I think there's enough reviews that say it. I don't feel bad saying it. I've never written one before, and until this book, I was like, no cliffhangers. No, we don't do that. It's like everyone I would do duologies or duets, and I'm like, no, if we told one story, we do it. And this one I was like, nah, dude, it's a cliffhanger. Which is funny because writing the second book is I have to write myself out of that corner I just put myself in. Like,
that's so funny. Yep, there you go. You set the expectations a little bit higher with each one. But that's how you challenge yourself. You gotta challenge yourself, try new things, and dig yourself out.
No, this second book is, I'm looking at the plot board in my office right now. My husband had to come down and hang a 4-foot by 6-foot whiteboard, because when I started writing the second book, I was like, it's gone awry. And so I go back and move all these scenes. And I guess what people who haven't read it yet, I'm not spoiling, but you have to write yourself out of where you leave yourself, right? You have to think of any major series like Harry Potter. You got to get back to the train station. You got to get back to Hogwarts. You look at the Hunger Games. You're not just thrown back into the arena. You have the tour and the things that happen in the real world. And so writing the second one's been like, what do you mean I can't start at Parapet? Oh, she's done Parapet. Oh, so it's like it's the logical progression. And the second years, one of my favorite parts is when they're standing there after they've gone through Parapet, which anyone who hasn't read it is this giant stone bridge that has no railing, of course, and it's very thin, and you have to cross it, because if you can't have balance good enough to cross this bridge across a ravine, you can't walk the back of a dragon and these kids fall off and die like they do. And they're all volunteers, but kids fall off and die before they get across. And once they get across, they're sitting there. And as these dragons come, Danes, like I started to call them Masons again, because they've dug their claws into the stonework. And the first years are in there like quaking in their boots. There are these dragons that are breathing fire. And the second years are like, it's Tuesday.
Yeah.
That growth that happens between your first and second year, between like, I'm like, yeah, this is, they're
Just
running
the
again.
day. Yeah. So happen off of the whole war college idea, what kind of, or how you were thinking about doing military branch style versus based on your audience and suggestions that you got, what kind of research was involved? And was there anything that like surprised you the most to find out when you were researching?
One thing about my background, which is what my publisher really leaned into heavily, which I had to laugh at, is I'm a military brat. Both my parents are retired officers. My husband has 22 years of active duty service, as 10 of which is an Apache pilot. And the joke was like, as like this book sold on 50 pages, foreign rights everywhere. And I'm like, my publisher calls me a pessimist. We'll just go with that. And I'm like, you guys really buying off 50 pages? I've never written a fantasy. And it's like, you're betting a marathon runner on the first 100 yards. And I just don't know. But she was like, yeah, she's married to her own dragon rider. I'm like, it's an Apache. It breathes fire.
Yeah.
My parents, of course, did 20 years. And my grandfather did 30. He was the deputy commanding general of NORAD. And my other grandfather was in as well. So it's all I know. So military terminology is like
generations and generations. And
it is absolute, just generation upon generation. And so a lot of the terminology was really easy because I based it off of our military terminology, except for like wings and things like that. Like I divided the wings and the sections and the squads. It's very much set up like a military battalion with companies and platoons. I just named them something else. So it was very familiar to me. There's not, I think the biggest, I will tell you the biggest funny thing, which I'm sure my publisher's like,
I can edit out whatever you need me to.
Don't worry. So I was looking and I was like, what's a group of dragons called? What is a group? What do you call them? And I wanted, like I said, fantasy scares the crap out of me because you have dedicated readership, and I'm one of them, right? So I know how picky we are. And you got to have your world building's got to be on point, and you can't break the rules of your world. And it's just a very set, right? And the bar is raised. And I'm not saying that romance is easier. It's not. There's a different bar for your world building, for your political intrigue, for what's going on.
Yeah.
Besides your romance subplot. Scary. So scary. I Googled, what's a group of dragons called? Thinking maybe like in our fantasy fandom, we will have come to a consensus so that I can appease. And the first thing I see is thunder. It's called a thunder of dragons. I'm like, how cool is that? A thunder of dragons. No, so it turns out Christopher Paolini, who is Aragon, invented the term. And not only did he invent the term, he went on Twitter and I invented this term and it is mine. And I was like, oh, we are not thunder.
So like trademarked that.
So it's like fantasy exists in this area. Griffins are adrift. That's just what it is. Like in heraldic times, and it is acknowledged as a drift, and no one owns that. But going back and being like, who decided it was a coven of witches or a coven of vampires? Who decided that? And at what point did we adapt this terminology to be universal? And then who actually owns it? So of course I was like, sorry about that. And we had to change it. But that was the research that caught me up. And my publisher was like, never researched that. I was like, okay, I'm done.
Because I feel as the writer is, and you can almost make up whatever word you want as long as you're consistent with your world. But I guess it could be confusing. I don't know.
As long as you're consistent, you can name it whatever you want. It's one reason I love fantasy. And I saw this. Someone was talking about world building. I was on a panel for Comic-Con in Seattle, which is also like mind blowing because I'm a huge Comic-Con geek. My son's a huge cosplayer. I'm like, Comic-Con, and then to be on a panel, hey. And someone was like, building's really important. If you have mountains here, you better have a desert over here. And I'm like, but what if in my world weather patterns are different? Because like it's fantasy. So I feel like limiting ourselves to like earthly constraints is narrow-minded in some ways because it's fantasy. It can be whatever you want. Does that make sense? Like you could have silver, sure, maybe it's an ore, or maybe it comes from something else. It's fantasy as long as you're consistent in naming things. the bigger the book got as I was in edits. Like I watched it. It was the most surreal experience I've ever seen, because the laydown, which is like how many books get printed and put into bookstores, it kept going up and up. And I'm over here, are you? And at this point, because we wanted to do the sprayed edges. Have you seen the sprayed edges?
Yes, I have. They're so badass. So cool. Yes.
They kill me. But we had to speed up the second part of our editing process, not the first. And so I went to Texas and I moved in with my editor for 3 weeks, and she's the head of the company. And so I'm watching her have all these meetings, and the laydown just keeps increasing. And I'm over here editing. Are you sure? Are you betting the house? Are you positive? But as that happens, you get more and more people in the book. So you get more and more editors in the book and more people reading the book and saying, hey, is this term as catchy as it could be? Do we have things you don't think about? Do we have a hashtag available on this? Like things that you would never, like, I'm like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you do get to name it whatever you want, but you also have to, one, make sure no one use that word. One day that won't bite me. Someone's gonna, did you really? I'm like, yes, I did. And you have to make sure that you can own that intellectual property. It's a whole new world. I feel like I'm singing Aladdin writing this whole book. Legit.
Oh gosh, that's so funny that you were, because usually when I ask authors, they're like, oh, I found this little piece of history that really surprised me. And here you are. I was like, I didn't know if I was allowed to use this word. And then I didn't know what word I could use. But yeah, it's even something as simple as that. It totally could stump, because the book rests on a world of the dragons, like the world of dragons. If you don't have the dragons, it's like just another war novel almost. And
right. And I love the dragons because they're people. And I love that the dragons, they're their own characters, but they only speak to their own writers. They're very pretentious. And they're like giant assholes.
Yeah, because they can be. They're like,
yeah,
so
Violet falls off someone's back. The dragons, you are embarrassing me.
Yeah, where it's so funny because first person, and you hear it through Violet's point of view, where I think he said something akin to "for fuck's sake."
Yeah, pretty much.
And it's things like that, whereas I think my favorite parts were just like the interactions between the dragons and their writers, just because it's a funny dynamic.
In the Empyrean, which is the Dragon Society, like the Dragon Council, which is also the name of the series. I'm so glad we nailed that down, because trust me, like, we need a series names. I'm like,
yeah.
The pressure on this one was like, I live in advice. I'm sorry, hold on. The Empyrean doesn't deign to tell humans why they make their decisions. And the first rule of dragonkind is protect dragonkind. I would say they love their writers. They have a very symbiotic relationship with their writers, but also, humans.
Yeah.
They find themselves to be the superior creature, and that's all there is to it. I will say the most research I did was into medieval weaponry for their tales, because I wanted them to have all different tales, and to have weapons, and to basically really visually bring it home that these are instruments of war, is what these dragons are. And when I was writing it, I remember writing it thinking like there's a ton of pressure on it from the get-go. From the second they said you were gonna launch the line. And then I remember thinking, she's gonna make me take this out. She's gonna think a dragon with a club tail or a scorpion tail or a morning star tail or which is a medieval weapon.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get it taken out. And she was like, this is amazing. And I was like, my dragon tails. So that I do a lot of research into that, and a lot of research into what's appropriate in time. Like they have clocks, so they have clockwork, and they do have bathing chambers. And a lot of people get stuck on fantasy one. It's like, it's a fantasy world. Personally, I can make it whatever I want to. I would like a bathing chamber. It's where I'm at with it.
It's also, I think people like when they think of dragons, they think of medieval era. And so it's, you think of what was with that.
And it's not. We didn't peg down a timeline. We did for some things. They don't have electricity, but they do have magic that powers things. Like they have pens that you can only power once you have your own signet that can force the ink through. We're still in horse and buggy. We don't have steam engines. We don't have any of those things. So we're not quite medieval. We're a little bit like 1600s, I would say, in there, 1700s. And the best thing about it being a fantasy world is you can create your own things. You can say this has been invented and this hasn't. And I don't have to go according to an earthly timeline because we're not on Earth.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of research into the weaponry. That was probably and what's it called? Oh, and fight scenes. Romance, you're not writing a lot of fight scenes. So lots of research into fight scenes and sparring and a lot of that.
Yeah, I imagine that was really tricky to like get that sequence down too, and like the movements, and yeah, especially if even in fantasy or in romance, it's like even fantasy maybe more likely, but yeah, like hand-to-hand combat, you got to make it believable, you got to make it real. It's like, yeah, of course there'd be hand-to-hand combat. They're like prepared,
Right.
they're training for war, they're training
They're,
for any situation possible.
they're at a war college. And I think it's especially when they visit the outposts, and you can see if you were going to have to do an assault on an outpost, how would you do that? Like, they can't just stand their dragon backs. How do you get there? How do you handle a military unit and things like that? And they're very much like the squads are very much units. And so at least I get to see that a lot from being married to my husband, like how that camaraderie works and how those kind of function in those situations. And there are plenty of times in decision making, especially towards the end of the book, which we won't give away, where I went to my husband and I'm like, would this be an order? Would this be a choice? How would you handle this if you are 20, you're 22 years old, 23 years old, and you have all these kids who are younger than you? How are we handling this? So I'm really lucky that I have a firsthand military source, because I'm not like, you're not like, I'm not out there doing push-ups at 5 a.m., but I can, shout down the hall, like, how does this work? And my husband, and
Cute though. I bet that he loves that though, where he could lend his expertise to you, and he's probably like excited. Oh, she's just writing a war college book. Like he's like, my time to shine.
So my backlist is majority military romance. So majority of it, like my Flight and Glory series, like my first series, is all helicopter pilots going through flight school and things like that. And a lot of that's based on my husband. There's some books that like are things my husband has said, and he always like sneaks into my books. Like, I can't help it. He just does. I wrote one book where I turned around and I was like, I wrote you into a book. This is actually, I wrote you in like on accident. Like, his name is Jason and that character's name is Jameson. My husband's 6'4", and he's got that very dominant personality and that very self-assured thing. And he always just wiggles himself into those characters, but he has a good time. He reads all of my books.
Oh,
so either wonderful. At editing stage or wherever I feel comfortable giving it to him. And he read Fourth Wing and he was just like, where's the next one? Like,
yeah, same, Jason, same. Where's the next one? I'm right.
Unfortunately, that man gets me pacing. So like, I'm pacing. I'm like, I'm in this situation. Yeah, I have to come out of this. And he's like, don't tell me anymore. And I'm like, sure.
Like, yeah. Oh yeah, because he wants to not be spoiled too. So he's
right. And I'm over here, but I need to talk this out. But he's phenomenal. And I will say that man quit his military career once mine started going. And he switched from like Apache pilot dad to minivan stay-at-home dad. And it's incredible to watch. Like, he's the most supportive guy I could ever possibly ask for. But I'm always more comfortable in military settings. So when it was just going to be a unit, it was what the pitch had been. And she was like, put it at a war college. And I was like, oh yeah, sounds good. And I was like, can I kill people? And she's like, oh, lots of people. And I was like, I want to kill a ton of them. I want this to be like, this is what happens here. I need to desensitize. And she's like, yeah. So
that's awesome. It's awesome that you had a team that was like really encouraging you, because you're like, can I do this? Is this allowed? Is this too much? And they're like, no, love it. Go for it.
And there are things we have to go back on. Writing it, I wrote it how I envisioned it and how we talked through the plot, just to make sure it was where we were going and things like that. Because the last thing I want to do, I want my editor to know where I'm going. Because if she gets to a point and she's like, this doesn't work, we could have solved that with a conversation before I started. Do you know what I mean? So I wrote the book as it just fell out. I really loved writing it because it was just so much fun to go to work. Let's put it that way. Like, I was like, I get to go play with dragons today. My husband's like, and my kids, you can't see it. My kids were cleaning out their toy room. That is a toy dragon.
Oh my gosh.
From their toy room, because they knew what I was writing and they were like, Mom.
That's adorable. That's so funny.
Yeah. So we'll put it up there. But like things like when I turned in the first draft, my editor was like, yes. And then the secondary agent will come in. And then as it goes up the chain, they're like, is it really okay to kill all these kids? I'm like, yeah, they signed up for it.
You're right.
And they're like, but they're all volunteers, right? We're not forcing them. I'm like, okay, we'll go make sure it's clear that they're all volunteers. So there are points where they like walk you back to make sure that we're not just.
It's not Hunger Games style. It's like you're signing up for this. Yeah.
And I'm reading, so I have this toxic habit where I read reviews until a book comes out. And this book it's been given out more. They did a huge ARC print run, which I'm very thankful for, but it means that there's more opinions coming in.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's great. In some ways it's, oh, okay. So I watch that. Like I watch to see how it's going to be received and if I've done my job well or what I could have done better if I'm in the mood for it. If I'm not, I just run away and hide. And I see a lot that it gets like Hunger Games comparison, which one is like super, super flattering. But two, Hunger Games, really, they're killing those kids to maintain control,
Yeah.
right? It is very much like the government's going to kill your children if you don't, if you don't let us keep control.
So like keep
One,
you in line type of thing. Yeah.
I have people coming home just to see you hear the footsteps, lacrosse is over. But this one, it's very much, it's a college. And the same thing, I get a lot of divergent stuff. And I'm like, it's a college and there's 4 majors and you choose. You get to college, if you pass the entrance exam, you get to choose which quadrant you want to go into. So these kids are dying because they're in the military and this is what they want to do and this is what they want to go. Hunger Games kids got, can you hear my dog? She just got very excited.
The kids and the dog and my husband have been making noise upstairs this entire time. The microphone is gonna pick up good things, so don't worry.
Oh, good. I'm glad because I
Yeah.
can hear. Yeah, we have an English bulldog, and she's amazing. We had 2, and we just lost our old man
Oh.
a couple months ago, and he was very old. He was 12 and a half, but it was devastating. But now she keeps following us around because she doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
Because he was like the leader, and now she's, I don't know what I'm doing, so she just follows us around everywhere. So all you hear is like her little nails in the heart are like, and you're like, okay, I can go to the bathroom. She's like, can
Oh no.
you? You know?
No, from what I hear, I just hear my 2-year-old moving his little chair around to probably try to reach things that he shouldn't be. So it's when I hear sounds like that, I'm like, where's Mason? What is he doing? Okay, we're like, is he like, if you're just hearing it from the other room, I'm just like, okay, what is he trying to get to? Do I care about it? He's trying to get the scissors. Yeah, I care. Like I just,
Yeah.
things like that where it's no, like get out of here. Stop being so resourceful.
It is. Our daughter is 9, our youngest, and she is autistic and she's nonverbal. So she uses alternate methods of communication. And so we can ask, what are you doing? And she can choose to not tell us. I'm not going to tell you. But then you see the chairs like lodged up to
Yeah.
where she can reach the Xbox to where,
Yeah.
so we're always like, what are you doing? And when we moved into the house, we bought the house like 2 years ago, she kept moving her stuff out. She's like, I don't live here. And so we had to install like all the locks really up high so she would be safe. Because we would hear the alarm system be like, hey, a door just opened, and immediately everyone in the house is like, you take this door, and we scatter. And she's like taking her toothbrush and a set of pajamas and put them outside, whatever door she's chosen. And I don't live here. But it was 2 months of that. So yeah, I get that.
Oh man, it's like never a dull moment. So hopping off of something that you were talking about before with what where you were struggling with a 2-part question. What were the most challenging parts to write, and then what were the most enjoyable parts to write?
Okay, the hardest parts to write. From a craft perspective, the battle scenes were the hardest for me to write because I knew it needed to be visual and really bring the reader into what was happening. But because we're on the backs of dragons and you're only in first person, I think a lot of fantasy is written in third, right? So you get the overall, and in this section of the battlefield, and in this section of the battlefield, but all you have is Violet. So all you know is what Violet can see and what Violet is experiencing on the field. You have no idea where Zayden is, no idea where the others are. The ones she sees are the ones that you get to see. So those were really tough to me. Not like Gauntlet and things were easy, but I do deep POV writing. So I feel like I try to sink into that character and feel what they feel. And so I would just have this like chronic anxiety. And I already have anxiety. So living in Violet's skin, I would just be constantly tense and wondering what was going to happen. And the other hardest thing was going to my editor and making sure like during developmental edits, most of those occurred toward the end because it's an end that you have to smooth out and you have to, everything has to logically flow to get us to a point like within their relationship, within what's going on, within what is the school been up to and what's this kingdom up to. And there were certain lines and points that were exceptionally important for me to make, which I can't really say without giving away the entire book.
Sure.
But what I'd gone to her and I said, this is important to me, like this. And like, and it's important to me that this point is made in this book and not the next. So making sure that there was a point logically to make that and to bring the reader on this journey and to make sure it fit, that nothing was forced. Do you know what I mean? That it was all natural, because it's hard. If you ever have characters fighting, I have to like write out a list of what points they have to make,
Yeah.
what has to be accomplished in this argument, and then logically lead them through a dialogue where you would get there. So you're not just like, yeah, but you didn't do the dishes last Tuesday.
Yeah.
Like nowhere. So I think the hardest were the battle scenes and just making sure the points I wanted to get across. And also, I worked really hard, and there's a really good chance I failed at this. And I am the first to always be like, if I failed, I tried really hard to be as inclusive as possible.
Mm.
Make sure that I had as much representation as I could in different areas of the book. And so making sure that we did that with sensitivity, and it wasn't just check the box. Make sure that every character here had a purpose and a story, and that they had a depth to them, I think.
The most enjoyable.
The most enjoyable, I'm gonna take a drink. So my favorite, I think you always have scenes, like at least for me, I don't know about other writers, I'm going to speak for all of writerdom. You always have scenes like when I start, this scene pops out to me and I know this belongs in this book, and I can't wait to write this scene. And there were a couple of them. And the first one was when she throws the daggers at Zayden's head. And he's like, you missed. And she's like, did I?
Yeah.
Back up, and showing that she could not only work with her brain, but also she does have some physical prowess. She passes in that agility test, and she can throw a dagger because it's something that's within her power. And when he says, you really are a violent little thing, aren't you?
Mm.
And I love that he calls her violence, and he sees what's in her true nature before she does even. So I loved writing that. And then, because I don't think that's giving, and then as I give everything away, threshing was something that lived in my head, and how threshing went down, which is when the dragons choose who they choose. And the scene where Xaden steps onto the mat, where he has figured out what she's been doing to beat all her opponents, and he takes her to the mat. To me, that was the most fun to write because I love sexual tension.
Yeah.
And it's always like, and there's a moment she's like, am I attracted? I'm not attracted to toxic men. Am I attracted? Ooh, maybe I am. Maybe I am getting attracted to toxic. Ooh, it's not okay. But that was the most fun for me, is in those positions where he's trying to teach her and he's knocking her on her ass constantly. But you also have, hello, beautiful man.
She's liking it a little bit.
But then I also think it's logical for her to be like, ooh, am I supposed to like this? Is this it's okay? Is this unhealthy? Is this, and we tried really hard to make sure that their relationship was as healthy as possible, given the fact that it's enemies and lovers. So yeah, that was the most fun. What was the most fun to read that doesn't give it away? So I can turn it around on you.
All right. I think some of when they're just them getting to know each other, I liked some of the dialogue. I think especially when there's one thing where she asks him, like, what's your favorite food? And he's chocolate cake. Stop being weird. It's just like little things like that where, because it shows like a different side of Xaden. You get to know him more. He's a little like because he comes off as like this hard, rugged, like no nonsense, like lethal dude, but he's also a person. Like he's so layered. There's so much more to him. Yeah, he's got his secrets, and once the reader learns with Violet like what you start peeling back those layers and get to know his reasons and just getting to know a little bit more about him with her, I really enjoyed just some of where she got to a point where she didn't mind like asking him those silly little things, and he was just like, why? I just love that they're just like, stop being weird. Like what?
Right. Like, why would you want? And I think Xaden is so guarded, of course, for obvious, I'm not obvious to the readers, but as you read it, you get to know why Xaden's so guarded. But when push comes to shove, he's 22 when this book starts and 23 when it ends. So he's a 23-year-old guy. And I know a lot in fantasy, we've got like 500-year-old men and 300-year-old men who are 1,000 and have fallen for the 19-year-old girl. I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm definitely not against it. But this kid is 22, 23. And so you do have those things where when she's, what is your favorite food? Or what is this? He's, what is your deal? Like, why? And she's like, why wouldn't you want to tell me? But to him, he's so used to people either hating him for what he is or depending on him for what he is, that he's not used to someone getting to know him to get to know him. And I love his emotional maturity. Like you see it, especially like writing book 2 is super fun because you have this guy, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with these feelings.
Yeah, I love that.
he's super fun, and I'm glad you like those. I always like to fight for the dialogue things. And she's like, we can cut, we cannot cut.
Yeah.
and the book just gets longer, and we look like, where can we cut? And I'm like, you may not take that scene. She's, we have to keep that scene. So
So because I think he's one of those people. So you had me at dragons. Like he's one of those like your agent, your editor who you pitch to like the
Yeah, she's like,
dragons, like
really? Dragon? Okay, all right, cool. Like it was like the fourth pitch. Like I was like, get this idea and this idea, which is always funny because I'm like, how do you expect authors to have 5 ideas just randomly?
right.
Yeah. But we do. We just go to our plot book. Oh, I remember that one
Yeah.
time I was in the shower and had this idea. We jump around. I think
Yeah.
like, and it comes from most unlikely. So I wrote an entire book because I got really pissed at Sanditon, like the BBC show. I got so pissed at the ending of the first season of Sanditon that I wrote an entire book, like legit. It's called The Things We'll Leave Unfinished. And I was lucky enough that it got picked up on TikTok this year, went viral and sold out everywhere. And I was like, book is 2 years old. Cool. But
Right. Yeah.
so I got so mad at Sanditon. And Fourth Wing, besides the dragons and the forced proximity, which is like where it's at, I was really inspired by current events and by what people are allowed to know. Does that make sense? Like who controls our history books and who controls what's being taught to the next generation? And
yes. Yeah.
and when is it okay to edit things out and when is it not, and when is it, especially because my degree is in history. So I'm a history nerd. And that was just very important to me, going through, not just because it could be just a Dragon Writing Academy book and they're fun and they're super fun, but the overarching meaning of what do we actually allow people to know is what came from current events. You can be watching a documentary and you're like, this is great, or this is so. Our brains are written. And I'm worst case scenario too, because I'm like, oh, I wonder how that could go wrong.
Yeah.
And then I write it. Yeah.
Because it's when you have a war college going on, you can't have war or military without some political like layer in there, because it's just they're so entwined, and the people calling the shots and the implications and why is this the method that they're teaching these things, like what are they teaching us, what are they not teaching us, what are they choosing, things, all of that. There's so many implications in that, so it totally makes sense that you added that extra layer, and it just made the book more sophisticated, even if it added one extra 100 pages to it.
Oh yeah, all the time I'm like, I have to layer that in. And I'm really like, I put a lot of Chekhov's guns, right? The guns on the table, and you got to pull the trigger for plot points. And my editor's like, the first draft, she's like, you pulled every trigger. It's like, guns on the table. She's like, no, we got to save them for like books 2 and 3. And it's like, oh,
yeah,
okay.
right. Yeah.
That's cool. That's fine. But whenever I edit, like I turned the book in at 154,000 words, which is like usually write like 130 in contemporary, because I usually write really twisty, emotional, screw you up kind of books. And this one, as I go through edits, I just keep adding. I don't think I'm taking out. I'm like, oh, I need an emotional beat here. Oh, this is where I layer in here. Oh, this is where this character needs to stand out. So we have this depth and this backstory. Oh, this is how, and so it just keeps growing. And the second book is longer. I'm not even done with it yet, but I told my editor, I was like, it's longer. And she's like, how long? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to give it to you and you're going to just decide what goes in and what doesn't with it.
I'm already gonna forgive you. It's okay. I just want it.
I always look like other fantasy authors and how it's debut, second book, third book. I'm like, okay, I'm on track. I'm on track. It's proportionate.
You're like pushing the envelope a little with each release. You're like, how much can I get away with? Like, I honestly
just write the story as I see it and what I think needs to be happening. And to me, I don't write a scene that doesn't need to be there. If I put that scene in there, there's a reason. And it's not just because what are our characters doing right now? Let's talk about them going to breakfast or things like that. Like to me, each scene has to move either the relationship along, the plot along, or whatever we're doing. And I remember I wrote The Last Letter, which is like one of my first longer books, and I turned it in, and it's the same publisher. I've been with him forever. Was like, this book is so long, and I'm like, it is what it is. And then my agent was like, it's so long. And I'm like, okay. They're like, it has to go on shelf space because you buy shelf space. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Okay.
You purchase shelf space. And so the thickness of your book takes up a certain amount of space on that shelf. And then they both read it in a night and they were like, there's nothing you can cut. I'm like, I know that.
You're right.
I wasn't trying to just be like, here's a long book for the sake of long book. No, it is purpose. In the second book, I think the first book has such a large cast. Like it really does. But when you think about going back into a second year, now you have the first years.
So you need like more characters because you got to like up the ante, right? You can't You got to add new levels of interest, because otherwise not all readers want to. I would be fine if it was the same characters, but that's like the reason why you got to keep things interesting. You got to keep adding new scenarios, new elements to, because it's like we're already past that. Now
Yeah.
what's the next step up?
Yeah. And I struggled. I'm probably much like the Tom Holland of authors over here. My publisher's like, I wrote the first 95,000 words of the second one, and I've never had a book go in hardback before, let alone have so many people reading it and being like, this is this. And I'm like, I'm just in my basement reading. Literally, I'm in the basement. I always tell my husband, there's a troll in the dungeon, because it's like where I'm at. But I came back into the second book and I immediately was like, you have to up your stakes. If you don't up your stakes, like, it's no fun reading. But also, you can't really repeat Parapet.
Yeah.
It doesn't scare her. She's dancing across it.
Yeah.
Toward the end. You can't repeat threshing. You can't repeat presentation. You've already established that the second years aren't as scared. They're more settled in. They're more, so you get more like a psychological aspect where it's like, how do you still have friends there, knowing that they're going to go, and knowing now what Violet does and what's going on with the school, and how that takes more of the precedence, because first year, they flat out tell you most of the first years, that's where your highest risk of dying is. And so you have to look at it and be like, all right, how am I going to not kill these people, but also kill these people, but also not? It's been super fun to develop the world, I think is the best way to put it.
Like you have to push yourself to get a little more creative with it too.
You have to be more creative, and you have to think like, what's creative and what's logic, right? So like logically, unless you're going to, and we're in first person. So unless you're going to hop into a first year's head and you're just going to repeat what you've already done, no one wants to do that. You have other obstacles coming. So for knowing what she knows, and I can tell you this, I don't think it's for knowing what she knows, you have an obstacle of, we're going to kill you for what you know.
Yeah.
And there's a line in the second book that's, secrets aren't really good leverage, because people who hold them die and lose their leverage. So you immediately have an upped ante, but the world is just so much bigger in the second book that it's hard to not be like, by the way, it is. So
you're just like, surprise, it's okay. Like
it is, and it's fun. And things like people who hate certain characters or will hate certain characters by the end, it's so funny to me because I already know where that character's going.
Yeah.
And I'm like, just give him a second. Just hold up. Let's give the man a second. As I like say, it's a boy. But it is super fun. I will say that it is super fun to go to work every single day getting to write dragons. And I still write contemporary. So I write for Montlink as well. So I will always write contemporary, because no matter what, I will always be in some situation where I get an idea. Do you know what I mean? And suddenly that idea just goes, and I know that I'm going to end up writing a book for it. But man, is it really nice to actually get to go write my first love. It's super incredible. Like, that's dragons. Who want to write dragons?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I'm just like, look at it's hanging out on my desk here. And that's why I hope my husband gets around to reading it. So then okay, like we could talk about it.
I hope so. I always wonder, because it's romantasy is what they call it. That's the new catchphrase, right? Romantasy, which is like romantic fantasy. And I always wonder, will it speak to guys? And my husband likes it, but my husband's like under a moral obligation to like it, because he sleeps with me, right? So if you don't like it, it's not going to go so well for you tonight. But I always wonder if it'll cross that, because it does have that romance subplot.
It does, yeah. It's got the spicy scenes. That's also like where I've like, I was like, no, you'll agree. Oh my God, my dog, I've closed the doors and she's like such a brat. She just wants to come in here. But I'm like, no, girl.
My cat does it, and I have 11,000 tip-in sheets on my desk. You just can't see them because I think I have to sign like 18,000 in 2 months. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever done in my life. But my cat keeps trying to come in, and I'm like, no, because I could just see like all the piles.
Oh no, yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. That's like just a little ticket time bomb waiting to happen. So just a couple more questions before we wrap up here. That our time flew by so quickly.
Sorry, I'm a talker.
No, it's okay. I love it. I feel like we could just go down so many rabbit holes here. So what advice would you give to Violet? What advice would you give to Xaden?
At what stage in the book? They're different people. And if they're not different people by the end of the book, you didn't do your job.
Yeah, I would say How about the end? Because maybe try your best to be spoiler free. Because I know if they listened to you at the beginning of the book, there'd be no book.
At the end of the book, I think my biggest advice for her going into book 2 would probably be hold on to your humanity as long as possible, and into, without giving away like what happens at the end of the book, give the man a break. I would probably tell her there's a fine line between self-preservation and self-destruction when it comes to her relationship with Xaden, and things that happen in the end that throw a giant, wrench into that relationship. So yeah, I would say that Xaden, I would say therapy is an amazing thing. Like therapy, that the man has some trauma. He just has some trauma, and he doesn't know how to let someone love him, and he doesn't know how to handle the feeling of actually being loved. And so it's fun in the second book to watch him just make mistakes where you're like, dude, you wouldn't have done this last year. And I think there's times where she says that, like, you've never done this. And he's like, I didn't love you before. I had a problem. For him, my best advice to him would be, not you can't save everyone. He knows that. Just let Violet be Violet. This is probably what would get him out of so much of what is going on right now, is let Violet be Violet, and maybe stop withholding information, whether it's like accidental or intentional. Like, just sit down and have a conversation.
Yeah. It's definitely new territory for him, for sure.
It is, and it's super fun to see. And it's, at least for me, it's super fun to watch because,
no, I can't wait. Like I said, like I loved watching him step out of his comfort zone a little bit and being caught off guard. I loved it.
Yeah, he's dragged there. Let's put it that way. Like, he gets dragged where he's, I know. And it's fun to watch them make mistakes. And I think she's like, Violet's kind of flawless in the first one, not like perfect, but like her decision making is always sound, and she never makes the stupid, she never makes the typical heroine mistakes that you see where you're like, no, dude. And in the second one, there's mistakes that are made because there just are. So it's really fun to watch them find their way. So
yeah, absolutely.
But if I could tell them that, we wouldn't have a book. Let's just be honest. I sit down and be like, if you guys would just have a conversation.
You're right.
And I'd be like, tension is solved by chapter 2.
You could avoid all of this.
And now, right? And my editor would be like, why is this book about them going for ice cream? But do you know what I mean? Like, why does anything happen? Oh, because they have a super healthy discussion, and everything's out in the air, and they're on the same page, and we're ready to go. And they're 23, or she's 20, or she's 21 in the next book, and he's 23.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love it. I can't wait. Rebecca Yarros, where can readers and listeners find you online and on social media?
Dude, I'm everywhere because they make me legit. Like, I'm a huge actual introvert, so social media is as much as you're gonna get me. So I'm at RebeccaYarros.com, which is a really easy way to find links to my Facebook, my Instagram. I have a reader group on Facebook called the Fly Girls, which is poetic now because I wrote about helicopter pilots and now dragon riders. I am on TikTok, but I mostly use it for cat videos. I'm really bad at marketing myself. If you can't tell, there's some awkwardness there. So you can come find me on TikTok. Please do. I'm sure I'll post announcements, but I'm not going to be your most entertaining person because I'm there for the cat videos.
That's okay. That's okay. Betty, the readers love cats. So
I didn't know it was like an algorithm thing. So like, my videos get pushed out to people who like cat videos and the am I the asshole questions, right? Because I love other people's drama.
Sure.
So like, if I throw a video out there, it's not getting to my intended audience. But I still enjoy it. I love TikTok. I just lurk, and I love to listen to reviewers and what reviewers think, and I just lurk and like tiptoe out. So I'm not like disrespectful, but
you're just like, I love that word lurking, because you're just like passing by, peeking, and then being on your way. Like, just
I want to know. So I want to listen to reviewers, not about my books. I've learned the lesson. If people start talking about me, I'm like, peace out. Unless my husband has watched it and been like, this one is safe. No, because I'll be on the floor, like under my desk with a bottle of wine.
Oh.
But I love to hear what reviewers say about other works, so that I can hear, what are we looking for? What are causing problems? What is working? What is not? How do I not stumble into traps, or making sure that I'm, you can find me all those fun places or the local hockey rink. is typically where you will find me.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Okay, Rebecca Yarros, Fourth Wing. It comes out on May 2nd. Thank you so much. This was, like I said, we could have just, I feel like we could talk for hours about all of this. It's such a joy to talk to you. And like I said, I can't wait. I can't wait for book two. I'm rooting for you, rooting for Violet, rooting for Zayden, all that good stuff. But thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah,
glad you liked it because it's got to be
appreciate
awkward
it.
when you don't.
Yeah.
So that made me feel better. You filled my love tank for the day. I appreciate it. Oh, and
So
I will tell you, since we're off, the biggest when I wrote, because I wrote the first line I wrote was a dragon without their rider is a tragedy, a rider without their dragon is dead. They knew that would set the tone. That was what I wanted. And as I finished the first 50 pages, the next line that I wrote that I knew would go into the book was, it only takes one desperate generation to erase history. That was
yeah.
the biggest. So when you're like, what was your favorite part? It was me. I was like, that was what had to, that was the line
Yeah.
that had to get
And
in
that
there.
and that does give away like a good, or that does foreshadow like a big plot point.
So I didn't want to be like, actually, I wanted to drive it home. Stop editing our history books. That's being a historian. So, and it's funny, like some of the reviews will come in, it's all right with that. And I was like, the whole thing is about stop erasing our history books. But okay, all right. Well, I get it's the military. Sorry, they're killing people. But yeah.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me and chatting with me. It just
Yeah.
took an hour and a half of your day.
There you go. That was the bonus episode Rewind interview with Rebecca Yarros from April 2023, a couple years ago, talking about Fourth Wing before the book even came out and before it has exploded into the series that we all know and love today. Rate, review, subscribe. Please find Cantina Book Club online and on social media as well. If you need book recommendations, check out cantinabookclub.com. I'm always posting reviews up there from all types of genres, whether you like romance, historical fiction, nonfiction, and memoirs, thriller and suspense. There'll be a recommendation for you guys, whatever you're looking for. And if you do enjoy a book and the author, do give them a rating and a review on either like Amazon or Goodreads. It really does help authors out to promote their work so that they can continue making more for readers to enjoy. And as always, thank you guys so much for listening.